All right, attempting to evaluate cosine inverse or arccosine of a negative ratio. So negative square root of 3 over 2. So as we get going on this one's a little bit trickier than looking at sine or tangent of a negative ratio on the inside here, but I kind of get started the same way. That I'm going to go ahead and set this equal to a dummy variable and rewrite it in terms of cosine as opposed to cosine inverse. So this looks like negative square root of 3 over 2 equals the cosine of some angle x. All right, so you may be saying to yourself, well, square root of 3 over 2, that's one of our pretty common angles or ratios that comes out that goes along with cosine when you plug in the angle pi over 6 or 30 degrees in here. However, we have to be a little bit careful that when we're dealing with cosine inverse, when you have a negative ratio on the inside here, you can't simply say, well, it's going to be x equals pi over 6, and we'll simply make it negative. Now, this is based on the fact that if you make this a negative, that'll end up in the fourth quadrant. So an angle in the fourth quadrant is going to be a problem when you're thinking all students take calculus. Cosine's positive in the fourth quadrant, so we can't simply make this a negative angle or else that'll end up in the fourth quadrant. Cosine of an angle in the fourth quadrant is going to be positive, not negative. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to use this pi over 6, and we're going to place that into the second quadrant. So I'm going to use that as a reference angle, and I'm going to put pi over 6 into the second quadrant. That's a 6 in the denominator here. So pi over 6 goes in the second quadrant here as a reference angle. And we need to calculate what's this angle that wraps around into the second quadrant that is going to use pi over 6 as a reference. So of course, wrapping halfway around the unit circle is pi. So to calculate this angle, what we're going to do is we're going to say pi minus pi over 6, or that's equivalent to 6 pi over 6 minus pi over 6. We're looking for 5 pi over 6. So instead of using pi over 6, we have to use that as a reference angle into the second quadrant. And that's because we're dealing with cosine here as opposed to sine or tangent. That we're going to have to use that as a reference angle into the second quadrant whenever we have cosine of some angle equals a negative ratio over here on the other side. So we can't really use the pi over 6. That's not our solution. That just moves us in the right direction as what our reference angle is going to be in the second quadrant. You're going to have to wrap around whenever you have a negative ratio here. So I hope this helps out as you're working with cosine inverse of negative values. These can be the tricky ones. So good luck.